Just ahead, we'll look at the most recent effort to organize an Amazon warehouse. Did the former Teamsters president promise his support to the former president in exchange for loans to a company where his drivers worked? A busy week at the Nlrb, and we'll talk with Joe Maniscalco from laborpress.org in New York for his thoughts on the state of labor in the city. All that and more as Labor This Week begins now. Hello, I'm Mark Harrison. We begin tonight with inflation. As workers, it seems all we hear about lately is how expensive we've gotten, how much wages have increased since the pandemic, how difficult it is to find people willing to work. Well, as it turns out, we haven't seen an increase in our incomes. In fact, in a report released by Friday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that total worker compensation has declined by 3.7% over the past 12 months when inflation is figured in. It is the largest decline recorded since 2001, when the index was first established. With inflation rising faster than it has over the past 40 years, any increases we're seeing in wage and benefits are being quickly eaten away, and it's causing a bit of a catch-22 in Washington, where Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell points out that the index is a factor in the central bank's decision to raise interest rates. It turns out that as compensation costs rise for businesses, workers earn more, but these businesses pass the increased costs and wages and benefits to consumers who are in fact the very same workers they give the raises to. This in a country where consumer spending accounts for 70% of the gross domestic product. Last week in a rally in New York in support of the vote to organize a second Amazon warehouse, American Federation of Teachers President Randi Weingarten addressed the crowd saying, "We have to support you. We have to support you. We must support you. Morally, we must support you. Righteously, we must support you. Because with you goes the labor movement. With you goes workers' rights. With you goes solidarity. With you goes everything." For more on this issue, let's welcome our first guest. Joe Maniscalco joins us now from New York City, where he is the senior editor at laborpress.org and a member of the International Workers of the World Freelance Journalist Union. Joe, welcome.
Hey, Mark. How's it going?
Good. We're glad you're here. Let's get right into it. Certainly the labor buzz in the city is the new Amazon labor union with its recent win on Staten Island and with the voting now ending for a second warehouse in the borough. What are your thoughts on the impact of what this means for the workers at Amazon who are going to be directly impacted by this decision to organize?
Well, of course, following that April 1st win that the ALU had at JFK 8, which is a massive complex, over 5,000 people work there. It means now they're going to have a contract. That's the main thing now is they're going to have that next challenge. Actually have a contract is going to address a lot of the systemic issues that are going on inside that warehouse.
With that said, getting a union on a property and getting a first contract can be a real challenge. This is an independent union. It's not affiliated with any other national unions. So we're talking about a situation where they're going to have to find the right people, the talented people to do the negotiating, and they're certainly up against a behemoth corporation in Amazon. What are your thoughts on how that's going to go?
Well, I mean, that actually, goes to a much larger question about not only what happens at Amazon in that fulfillment center on Staten Island, but also what does it mean for the rest of the House of Labor? Because you do have an independent union leading this charge, and you have somebody no less than Randi Weingarten, the head of the AFT, saying that the Amazon labor union did everything the right way and that we have to support them. So now you have a situation where both sides need each other. So both sides are going to have to learn from each other. It's not going to be a situation where, all right, established labor unions come in and then they're just going to dictate to ALU about how things should be. That's not going to happen. But at the same token, getting a contract at Amazon is going to be a tremendous challenge. and the ALU is going to need, and of course they deserve, all the help from the rest of the labor community.
Along those lines, just across the street, the warehouse, they're actually counting the vote, finishing the count this week, and we'll know about that probably early next week, if not over the weekend. LDJ5, the sorting facility, is also voting on the Amazon labor union. Any thoughts on that, how that's going? Do you have any sort of vibe up there?
Well, they actually held a pre-vote rally last weekend on Sunday, and you saw a lot of traditional labor support, and it remains to be seen. It's a small facility. It's about 1,500 workers, I believe, but it's crucial that the ALU continue this momentum, because if they do lose that vote, I mean, Amazon is going to jump all over them and use that to try to make getting a contract for the JFK 8 facility so much harder.
Yeah. That rally you just spoke of, if we could just talk about that for a minute. There were a lot of who's in the labor movement. Of course, it's an election year for the AFL, but nonetheless, there were some interesting things said there. Can you kind of report on that a little bit for us?
Well, yeah. I mean, probably most pertinent person talking about the election is Sarah Nelson, head of the flight attendants union. And what she was saying was, after 25 years in the labor movement, the ALU is the answer to her prayers, because you have a fighting militant union, and she's all about that. Again, it goes to this age-old question about the factions inside the labor community. You have, to put it in simple terms, a left versus right. And right now you have everybody saying the people who you consider on the left have got the right formula. You've got the rest of labor saying, yeah, that's how you do it. Rank and file, democratic, from the ground up. That's how you're gonna win contracts. That's how you're going to win unionization. So, we'll see if that support continues.
Changing the subject a little bit, more than 50% of the restaurant workers in New York City have left their jobs since the pandemic. There are currently 2 bills in the state legislature, one in the House and one in the Senate. Would you help address the many reasons that we have for the one fair wage issue, as it's being called?
Well, the biggest thing is what a subminimum wage does to the people that have to work under those conditions. The women who work in these positions are totally open to a gamut of sexual harassment on the job. When you think about it, if you work for tips, what do? You have to try to make the customer happy. So that means that you're in a position to tolerate a lot of what comes down to sexual harassment on the job. And the One Fair Wage campaign just recently released a report this past couple of weeks, and it details the amount of women during the pandemic who just fed up and are just leaving the industry because they have to work for tips, and that subjects them to all kinds of sexual harassment on the job. And this is a systemic issue, a chronic issue that's been going. I've been writing about this since 2013.
Finally, what can you tell us about the lasting effects COVID-19 has had on workers in the city, and what, if anything, can we do going forward to address some of these issues?
I mean, that's a major question. It's a complex issue. Is a myriad of things to talk about. You want to just talk about the building trades, for example. Are people going to go back to their workplaces? And what does it mean if they don't? What does that mean for building? I mean, I spoke to guys in the building trades in the middle of the pandemic who had their work on projects interrupted and they're worried. They're thankful that things restarted again, but they remember what it was like driving into the city when it was a ghost town. And if people don't go back to their traditional workplaces, that's a lot of office space that's under construction. That what happens to?
Yeah. All right. Joe Maniscalco, senior editor at laborpress.org. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you being here. And Labor This Week will continue right after this. A disturbing story coming out of Washington this week, where a congressional watchdog group is suggesting that former President Donald Trump and his aides may have helped shepherd a $700 million federal loan for YRC or Yellow Corporation in order to gain support from the Teamsters Union leading up to the 2020 presidential election. The investigation was launched last June following reports that the freight carrier may not have been eligible for the loan and may have misused the funds, and that the company was not, according to the Defense Department, critical to national security, which was a requirement at the time to be considered for the loan under the CARES Act. The report went on to say that the loan's approval involved the intervention of top Trump administration officials, potentially including the president, and its generous terms also violated the CARES Act risk and interest rate requirements. According to the report, YRC's lobbyists were described as being giddy over the prospects that they would be getting the loan, and that former Teamsters President James Hoffa spoke to Trump about the YRC loan in mid-June of 2019, and that the then Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin also spoke to Hoffa. Also noted in the report was the fact that Hoffa thanked the president after the loan was approved. All of this, according to the report, suggesting that President Trump may have intervened to press for Yellow's receipt of $700 million in national security loans based on the calculation that it could result in praise from a union leader months before the presidential election. Hoffa lost his bid for re-election last November to Sean O'Brien. As for Yellow, they have denied any wrongdoing concerning the Treasury loan. We move from trucks to airplanes, where Delta flight attendants will soon be getting paid for working during the boarding period of their flights. Flight attendants traditionally are not paid until the cabin doors are closed. Delta flight attendants are the only non-union represented group among the larger air carriers, and it's no secret that the Association of Flight Attendants, which represents 50,000 flight attendants at 20 different airlines, would like to count Delta among their numbers. With only its pilots unionized, Delta makes no apologies for having great distaste for unions. Could the move be an effort to head off another round of attempted organizing at the carrier? Well, the AFA sees Delta's latest move as a sign that it is doing something right, saying in a statement that it seems they are feeling the heat. Keep going. Let's celebrate that our organizing is pushing management to do more than they would have done without being challenged. And with that, the FAA is warning Delta flight attendants that without a contract, the carrier could rescind the new pay while boarding benefit at any time. We'll be right back with a recap of the busy week in Washington for the NLRB. It's been a busy week in Washington for the National Labor Relations Board. We'll begin with lawmakers in the House calling for a $94 million budget increase for the board. That's a third more than last year's budget, and it's mostly due to the fact that workers are keeping them busier than they used to be. Much of that coming from Starbucks, where the board has been hit with more than 200 stores filing for election petitions. As well, the Starbucks Corporation has been hit with more than 100 unfair labor practice complaints from both workers and unions. The board's staffing levels are as low as they were in 1958, even though the number of private sector workers since then has tripled. Staying with Starbucks, the NLRB is suing the corporation for retaliating against 3 workers involved in a unionizing effort. The 3 were variously suspended, discharged, or placed on leave. The board's Phoenix region has sued for full reinstatement of those affected. Starbucks has denied any wrongdoing and said in a statement that it wholly disagrees with the claims made by the Labor Board. The board has approved a union certification win by mail balloting despite postal delays, saying that the local Nlrb acted properly and within its jurisdiction to certify late arriving ballots because of delays in the U.S. mail system. It seems several of the late arriving ballot senders were able to provide proof of a timely mailing. And finally, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has found that President Biden's firing of Nlrb General Counsel Peter Robb was lawful. The firing took place minutes after the president took office on Inauguration Day, and the current General Counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo, praised the recent ruling. I'll be right back with some thoughts on the current state of the labor movement in our country right after this. The time has come in our nation for a conversation about the very rights of workers, about the rights of workers to unionize on a fair and level playing field, the likes of which we haven't seen for some 60 years. And with that conversation, we are going to have to hold ourselves to account. Joe Maniscalco touched on it in our interview earlier in the show. Are we as workers going to line up behind the so-called white-collar unions and associations that pay their officials with mid to high six-figure salaries and lavish benefits and expense accounts, or are we going to embrace the type of grassroots organizing drive we have just seen at the Amazon warehouses, where a group of workers with ample complaints against their employer come together behind a fired coworker and say collectively, "We've had enough," where they speak with one voice, where the color of their skin, the country of their origin, their gender makes no difference, where when they are in the workplace, regardless of their political identification, they understand that they all must work together, that they must put aside their differences. There is a great deal to be learned by understanding that that is exactly what just happened at the singular warehouse on Staten Island, owned by the largest employer in the United States. Think about it. And think about joining us here next week on Labor This Week. I'm Mark Harrison.